In the spring of 1984, long before anyone in California knew the name Richard Ramirez, a quiet neighborhood in Glassell Park became the starting point of a nightmare. It happened inside the home of a 9-year-old girl. She was asleep in her bedroom when an intruder slipped in through an unlocked window. He moved with purpose, not randomly, not like a typical burglar looking for valuables. He went straight to her room. The girl later said she woke up to the sound of breathing, slow, steady, close to her face. The man covered her mouth so she couldn't scream, lifted her from the bed, and carried her out of the house. He took her to a nearby location, assaulted her, and then left her there, alive but terrified. Miraculously, she managed to find help. For detectives, this case was disturbing but confusing. The attacker didn't match the profile of a typical predator. He left almost nothing behind. He didn't speak. He didn't take money or valuables, and he vanished into the night before anyone even knew he'd been there. At the time, police viewed it as an isolated attack. Horrifying, but not connected to anything larger. No one realized this was the first strike of someone who would soon terrorize Los Angeles and San Francisco with a level of unpredictability investigators rarely see. Looking back, this moment, that quiet window, that silent entry, that early morning panic, was the beginning. The first known crime of a man who fed on fear, moved like a shadow, and left entire neighborhoods sleeping with their lights on. He was born in El Paso, Texas in 1960, into a family that was already struggling. His father was a strict, volatile man who worked long hours on the railroad. His temper was known in the house, and the kids grew up learning to stay quiet when he was in one of his moods. His mother was hardworking but overwhelmed, trying to manage 5 children while dealing with the stress inside the home. Richard was the youngest of the siblings, and he often felt pushed out of the way. The quiet one nobody really noticed. His older brothers got into trouble early, drifting into crime, drugs, and street life. Richard watched it all closely, picking up patterns most kids never see. School didn't offer him much escape either. Teachers described him as distant, distracted, and often half asleep at his desk. He struggled academically, not because he lacked ability, but because he was rarely mentally present. He'd stare out windows, drift off during lessons, and avoid eye contact. Kids didn't pick on him much. He wasn't loud enough to attract trouble, but he wasn't really part of any group either. Just a quiet kid fading into the background. But the biggest influence of all came from outside the immediate family. His older cousin, Miguel. Miguel had returned from the Vietnam War deeply damaged. He showed Richard graphic photos from his time overseas. Things no child should ever see. Bloody Polaroids, war trophies, stories told with a grin instead of shame. Richard soaked it in. Not scared, just silent. Then came the moment that changed everything. Richard was in the room when Miguel shot his own wife during an argument. A child watching a killing at point-blank range. That event broke something inside him. After that, Richard began spending more time alone, staying out late, sleeping in graveyards, drifting away from anything normal. It didn't happen overnight, but the path was already forming. A violent home, an unstable mind, older brothers getting into crime, a war-traumatized cousin showing him horrors, and a moment that shattered whatever innocence he had left. This was the foundation. The beginning of the darkness that would surface years later in Los Angeles. As Richard reached adulthood, he slipped deeper into a life lived at night. He drifted between cheap motels, bus stations, and strangers' couches, never staying anywhere long enough to build connections. He blended into the underbelly of Los Angeles, a city big enough for someone like him to disappear completely. He began breaking into houses regularly. At first it was for money or anything he could sell quickly. But it didn't stay that way for long. The thrill meant more to him than the valuables. He moved silently, slipping through windows and doors like he'd been studying it his whole life. Drugs became part of his routine. They kept him awake for days, wandering the streets, slipping into alleyways, riding buses until sunrise. The more disconnected he became, the more his crimes escalated. His burglaries turned unpredictable and chaotic. Sometimes he took things. Sometimes he destroyed things. Sometimes he just watched people sleep. Police had no idea who he was. To them, he was just one of countless petty criminals drifting through the city. But to Richard, these nights were shaping something far darker, something deliberate. The pattern hadn't fully formed yet, but the shadow of the Night Stalker was already there waiting. The turning point came in June 1984. Up to that point, police saw Richard Ramirez as just another drifter, a burglar, a nobody. But that changed overnight. Inside a small Los Angeles apartment, an elderly woman named Jenny Vinkow was found dead. The scene shocked officers. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. Whoever entered the home moved silently, slipped through a window without waking neighbors, and attacked with a level of aggression that didn't match petty crime. The victim had been stabbed repeatedly, and the room showed signs of a fierce struggle. There were no fingerprints, no witnesses, and no clear motive. But the part that disturbed detectives most was the sheer brutality and the fact the suspect stayed in the home longer than any normal intruder would have. Something about it felt deliberate, personal, controlled. The detectives didn't know the name Richard Ramirez yet, but they knew the killer wasn't finished. The violence was too intense, the intrusion too calculated. This wasn't someone who panicked. This was someone who enjoyed slipping into homes at night. And it didn't take long before more cases began surfacing. Break-ins with the same style. A man entering houses while people slept. Sometimes stealing, sometimes hurting, sometimes just watching. In one home, he assaulted a woman but left her alive, a disturbing mix of control and chaos. In another, he used the same approach. Late-night entry, sudden violence, fleeing into the darkness. Police realized they weren't dealing with random crimes anymore. They were dealing with a night predator who moved fast, left almost nothing behind, and struck without warning. The fear inside the department was simple. If he wasn't stopped soon, the city was going to face something far worse. After the first killing in 1984, investigators were still unsure what they were dealing with. But as the crimes escalated into 1985, the tone of the scenes began to shift. And this is when the occult signs first appeared. During one of the early attacks, police discovered something that immediately stood out. A pentagram crudely drawn on a bedroom wall, smeared in a rushed, chaotic way that made detectives wonder if it was a message or a taunt. Nothing graphic, just the shape itself, but it was enough to raise concerns. In another home, a pentagram appeared on the victim's thigh, drawn with what looked like makeup or lipstick. It was done quickly, almost scribbled, as if the killer didn't care about precision, only about making a point. Victims who survived began reporting the same chilling detail. The attacker spoke about Satan, muttering strange phrases, repeating the same dark themes over and over. Some said he demanded they swear to Satan.
I swear!
Others said he chanted words they didn't understand, but the tone alone filled them with fear. To police, it didn't feel like a ritual. It felt like intimidation, a way to inject pure terror into the crime. The symbols weren't neat or ceremonial, they were messy, impulsive, and delivered with the same chaotic energy as the attacks themselves. But the effect on the investigation was immediate. Detectives were forced to consider that the intruder wasn't just breaking in, he was sending a message. Something personal, something theatrical. Something meant to terrify both the victims and the city. As more cases lined up, a pattern emerged. Nighttime break-ins, random victims, homes entered silently, satanic references whispered to survivors, pentagrams appearing at multiple scenes. By now, investigators were dealing with a criminal who didn't just want to take lives. He wanted to create fear, to control the narrative, and to give himself an identity rooted in darkness. This was the phase where Los Angeles first realized their killer wasn't just a murderer, he was building a persona, and the media would soon give that persona a name. and that name would freeze the entire city. They called him the Night Stalker. A figure who slipped silently through neighborhoods, striking without warning, leaving behind homes torn apart, terrified survivors, and scenes that made detectives realize this wasn't just a criminal. This was someone who felt empowered by fear itself. The moment the media released the name, panic spread like wildfire. Locksmiths were overwhelmed. People boarded up windows. Gun sales surged overnight. Every shadow felt dangerous. But while Los Angeles was trying to protect itself, he was already moving on. Already searching for his next target. Already pushing deeper into the darkness he had created. Because for him, the name wasn't a warning, it was a badge of power. By late summer of 1985, everything had changed. The Night Stalker was no longer a ghost slipping through shadows. He was the most hunted man in California. Detectives across the Los Angeles Police Department were working around the clock. Patrol units doubled. Tips flooded in. And for the first time, they finally had something solid to work with. A footprint, a make of shoe, a rare size that barely sold in the United States. It wasn't much, but it was enough to link multiple scenes together with certainty. And every new incident repeated the same pattern. Forced entry, chaos, violence, and stolen items that later appeared in pawn shops or on the street. Then came the big break. A car, abandoned, wiped down, but not perfectly. Detectives found a single fingerprint on the rearview mirror. When it was run through the system, everything snapped into place. A name, a face, a man already known to police for burglary and drug use. Richard Ramirez. And suddenly the hunt shifted. This wasn't just tracking a shadow anymore, this was tracking a real person. A man with a past, a pattern, and now a face plastered across every news bulletin in the city. The moment his photo hit the front pages, Los Angeles went silent. People stared at the image in shock. Because the monster lurking in the night wasn't some imagined figure. He was real. He was alive. And now, he was running. It happened in broad daylight. A woman in East Los Angeles looked up and froze. The face from the newspaper was walking toward her. For a split second, she doubted herself. Then she screamed, "El Matador!" The words cut through the street. Heads turned. People stepped outside. Someone else recognized him. He saw the shift in their faces, and he ran. But this wasn't the darkness he hid in. This was daylight. Neighbors poured into the street. Men chased him through yards and over fences. He tried to steal a car. The driver fought back. More people joined in. He was struck, dragged down, surrounded. The man who had terrorized the city from the shadows was now on the ground in full view of it. When police arrived, they found him beaten, restrained, and held by the public. The Night Stalker had not been caught in the night. He had been hunted in the sun. When police finally took Richard Ramirez into custody, the city exhaled. He was charged with 13 murders along with multiple counts of attempted murder, burglary, and sexual assault. The scale of the case was staggering. Victims ranged from children to the elderly. There was no pattern beyond randomness and terror. The trial began in 1988. Ramirez entered the courtroom defiant. He showed no remorse. At one point, he raised a pentagram drawn on his palm and declared allegiance to Satan. He smiled at cameras, smirked at families of victims, treated the courtroom like a stage. The evidence was overwhelming. Fingerprints, ballistics, eyewitness testimony, stolen property. Survivors identified him. Forensic science tied him to multiple crime scenes. But something darker was happening outside the courtroom. Ramirez began receiving letters, hundreds of them. Some from women who claimed they loved him, some who said they believed he was misunderstood. A small but vocal group became obsessed with him, attending court, writing daily, calling him attractive, even proposing marriage. It shocked the public. While families grieved, he gained admirers. In 1989, the verdict came. Guilty on all major counts. The jury recommended death. Richard Ramirez was sentenced to die in California's gas chamber. He responded with a chilling statement to the courtroom, dismissing morality, mocking death, and promising that he would be remembered. He was sent to San Quentin State Prison, where he remained on death row for decades. But despite the sentence, the fascination with him never fully disappeared. Despite the death sentence, Richard Ramirez did not fade into obscurity. In 1996, while on death row at San Quentin State Prison, he married one of his most devoted supporters, Doreen Leoy. She had written to him for years, convinced he was innocent, or at least misunderstood. Their relationship grew through letters and prison visits. Under California prison rules at the time, death row inmates were not permitted conjugal visits. There is no verified evidence that Ramirez fathered any children while incarcerated. Rumors circulated, but none were confirmed. While some saw him as a monster, others saw something entirely different. A rebel, an anti-hero, a dark fantasy. Psychologists call this phenomenon hybristophilia, a paraphilia in which a person is sexually attracted to someone who has committed outrageous or violent crimes. For some women, notorious criminals represent danger without personal risk. A man who is controlled, contained, unable to truly harm them. For others, it's about fame. Infamy becomes magnetism. They are drawn to the spotlight surrounding the crime. There is also the rescuer complex and the belief that they alone can understand, heal, or redeem someone the world has condemned. Ramirez received hundreds of letters. Some professed love, some offered marriage, some sent money. The fascination never completely disappeared, but the death sentence was never carried out. On June 7, 2013, Richard Ramirez died at the age of 53 from complications related to B-cell lymphoma while still on death row. He was never executed. His body was cremated. His ashes were released to his family. There is no public grave for the Night Stalker. The man who thrived in attention ultimately left the world quietly in a prison hospital bed. And yet, decades later, his name still resurfaces in documentaries, books, and online forums. Not because of glamour, but because fear leaves a long shadow. Hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, share, and subscribe. Hit me up in the comments and let me know, who should we cover next?